Welcome to Future Foodcast. I'm Pam Miller, your host. Shout out to our sponsor, Farm to Plate. They are creating tomorrow's food business ecosystem today. You can find out more at farmtoplate.io. Now, fans of Future Foodcast, I want you to have an open mind this morning. We are bringing you cutting edge, innovative, and technologically savvy information that's happening in the food industry right now. And you probably haven't heard about it before. I am so excited to have Martin Zuria with us. He's the Chief Technology Officer for Nutrition Technologies. Martin, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah, a little bit of a teaser for our fans. And if you're a first-time listener, please have an open mind because we're going to be covering some new ground, aren't we, Martin? You're a bit of an evangelist in this area.
Yeah, absolutely. Some people may have heard of what we'll talk about a little bit today with insect agriculture. But even if you have, I hope we get to some areas that are really neat and really eye-opening for folks.
Yeah, I think we will. Well, why don't you uncover what you do there at Nutrition Technologies? Give us a little bit of information.
Sure. So I'm the Chief Technology Officer for the company. I joined very early on when it was just I was the fourth employee joining the team. And my background is in entomology, so very much kind of getting started on the research side. So I ran research for the company. And what we do is insect farming, right? So we're insect farmers, and we do quite a large scale insect production system where we take waste material. These are agricultural side streams and food byproduct waste from very large production facilities in Singapore and Malaysia, and we convert them using black soldier flies into feed ingredients and also a line of biofertilizers that's used for plant health and disease control. The larvae products that we harvest are used in animal feed, primarily in aquaculture to replace fish meal. So it goes into salmon feed, into shrimp feed, as well as a range of other aquatic species. And we actually have a good amount of our product. The insect protein meal goes to pet food as a sustainable dog or cat food in Southeast Asia and in Europe in particular, where that market's really growing.
Wow. Well, Martin, that was a lot of information. Let's pause and talk about some of those areas that you brought up, because I think each one of them deserves a little bit of attention. First of all, you and I are on opposite sides of the world map behind me. You're in Singapore and I'm in the United States, in the Southeast United States. So thank you so much for being on our podcast. We're excited because we are a worldwide podcast to bring this information to a broad listening audience. Secondly, this is what you're doing is really part of like a global agricultural movement that's happening with the whole insect research that you started with your company with, but your volumes are very large, and we'll get into that in a minute. And then the whole different uses as far as animal feed, fish food, makes a lot more sense to me than actually feeding fish, but we can talk about that too. But let's talk a little bit about the volumes here, because I think I don't realize the scale of the business that is actually happening worldwide in insect farming, and your company in particular.
Yeah, so this is really not a kind of little lab scale type of operation now. Our industry has been around for about a decade now, and has increased in scale really dramatically. So our production facility is kind of one of the kind of top three, top five in the world as far as production facilities, but there are various around the world, especially Europe has some really impressive facilities. Ours produces about 10,000 metric tons a year of insect products. So that includes like frass and insect meals, But yeah, it's a really high volume. So we like in a given day, we will take in up to 100 metric tons of waste material into the facility. It's a 2 hectare site. We employ over 200 people. So this is really a commercial scale insect operation. And we're sending hundreds of metric tons of processed powdered insect protein, and it's commercially available, right? So this stuff is going into commercial feeds. It's going into a whole range of products around the world where people, some brands have kind of dedicated insect product lines. There are insect product startups within the ecosystem. It's really exciting. In the pet food space, there's a whole bunch of startups exclusively working with insect products as sustainable ingredients. And within the fertilizer space, we've done a ton of work to launch new products, and we're scaling that across Malaysia and also even selling it to home users in Singapore. And there are, there's probably more than 100 companies like ours at various scales around the world. There are very few that have reached this level, but people take all kinds of approaches. There's very small backyard versions of what we do that are really compatible with small regenerative farms. And then there's some people take a very heavy kind of engineering or robotics approach. It's a really rich and diverse ecosystem that's emerging out of this new field.
Wow. And you say new field, I mean, about a decade old, really is relatively
Yeah.
new in the food industry. And I would say revolutionary because you have some solutions to problems that are looking for solutions. We have the sustainability issue, we have the good sourceable protein issue, and you're helping to solve some of those. All right, let's dive a little bit deeper into what insect protein can be used for. You talked about the aquatic area with the fish meal.
Yeah.
Jump into that a little bit.
So, there's the core reason that a lot of these companies came into being is around this issue of fish meal. And it's definitely not the only use case or the only kind of reason to start an insect company, but it's a very clear one. And it remains a very important one throughout. And that is that we have this problem in aquaculture, right? Which is that the feed source for aquaculture is the kind of the number one environmental, but also economic and kind of a business challenge for aquaculture companies and farmers. And really what it revolves around is the fact that carnivorous fish need to eat animal protein. And if you try to feed them kind of not animal protein, they will have a lot of issues, a lot of health stress, gastrointestinal lesions, all kinds of stuff that really damages their health and well-being. So there's the current solution, the kind of status quo is to take wild fish, right? Essentially sardines, and convert them into a product called fish meal to feed to farmed fish like salmon and shrimp, right? And that's kind of deeply illogical on many levels, right? About 90% of the fish we use for farmed fish are suitable for human consumption, right? They're just small. There's nothing wrong with them. And the volumes are enormous. So it's about 18 to 20 million metric tons of wild fish are caught every year and put into animal feed systems. So that quantity of wild fish being removed from the ocean is just inherently a huge removal of wild resources. And represents a significant portion of human fishing activities. Even though we don't think about it that much, it has a huge impact. You think about, what would happen to a healthy ocean ecosystem if you left 20 million metric tons. It's like something like 3 million African elephants worth of wild
Oh my
creatures
gosh.
that we're taking out of the ocean. It's enormous quantity.
Well, and I had never thought about that because I didn't realize, first of all, that fish had to eat really animal protein and that substitutes caused issues. That's the
Yeah,
first
and it's
revelation.
really too bad because aquaculture, like salmon and shrimp, that there's a lot of issues with aquaculture, but like from a biologist perspective, they're fundamentally very efficient systems,
Mm.
and they have the potential. Compared to any other livestock system, they have this incredible potential to be such a source of like healthy, nutritious, and efficient food, right? Compared to any other land-based source of protein, they're really efficient for feed. Like the feed conversion ratios, like can be close to 1 to 1, right?
Mm.
Which is really remarkable. But if that 1 to 1 is wild fish to farmed fish, then the whole thing is kind of madness, right?
Yeah,
So that one kind of feature, if we can fix that feature, and of course there are some fish species that don't consume animal protein, and that's very important as well for that to develop. But the farm species are very important, right? Things like salmon are very popular and very, very healthy foods for people. And if we can improve them, if we can make them better, they represent a very important source of nutrition, especially where we are in Asia, right? So Asia consumes kind of the lion's share of the world's seafood, but also at 80% of its aquaculture. So a lot of these issues are very, very kind of front of mind out here in Southeast
nice.
Asia and Pacific Asia.
Yeah, and just okay, we have just gotten started. I just want to show our listeners that is one just small benefit is the ability to really return so much fish to the capability of for human consumption. If we're having issues with sourcing and just replenishing some of that back into our waterways and being able to have that for human consumption and have another source of protein for the fish meal is just okay, one small solution. But let's move into another one because we have a land issue as well as when we're trying to other sources of protein for humans. We eat a lot of animal protein and they have to eat, and we use up a lot of land for that. So I love talking to the scientists in you, Martine, because you give us such good information. I appreciate it. But
Well,
share
it's
about that because sustainability gets a hit here.
yeah, and it's interesting because if we think about our food and our food systems and where our food is coming from, animal feed is just not on the top of people's minds. It's not something that comes up all the time. But if you really start to dig, it's kind of crazy and amazing and scary how much of the world's resources we allocate to animal feed. So it depends how you measure it, but basically more than 50% of agricultural land or arable land is used for animal feed, right? So if you take grazed land plus, kind of you imagine all the soy and all the corn that goes into animal feed. So I like to think of this like if you were an alien coming into Earth and you're assessing, okay, where does the species get its resources from? You would basically conclude, like as farmers, they are primarily farming for animal feed, right? Like our food system, like everything we say about agriculture, really, we should be like, well, about 60% of it is going to animal feed. So we don't think of our farming systems for that, but that's what we've optimized them for. And we have not done so I don't think we've done so in like a very logical, systematic way. I think that we got really good at producing food for humans, like soybeans, and we got really, really good at producing them at such scale that we adopted them for animal feed for species. A lot of these species, they were not, it's not their natural food, right? Like corn for cows or soybeans for fish, absolutely not their natural food. And we just didn't really think deeply about what are these animals supposed to eat, right? What did they evolve to eat, right? So poultry, of course, evolved to eat primarily insects. Most freshwater species of fish have something like a 80% of their diet will come from insects. And we just completely kind of missed the boat on that and kind of move forward with human food. And there's so many issues with that, right? Because it just competes with you think of all the land use that we waste, all of the resources that we put into it, the natural areas that could exist there instead, the food that we could grow for humans instead, of all that resource we put into animal feed. And then you compare it to an insect system, and it is a pretty wild comparison as far as resource use, right? So for one, of course, we're just our inputs are all waste products. They're all byproducts. But then as far as resource utilization, our facility in Malaysia, 1 square meter of our rearing space that we use to grow our insects will produce more protein over the course of a year than a hectare of soybean fields, right?
Can
So
you say that again?
yeah, so it's 1 square meter. So it's about a pallet space within our warehouse, because we have a vertical rearing system. So you imagine kind of layers and layers of these plastic trays, these
Yeah.
durable plastic trays that have the insects in there consuming these feed waste. And it's about a 7 to 10 day cycle. So you put them in. They grow an enormous amount in that amount of time. You harvest them, you process them, you start again. So because we can do so many cycles in a year, we will produce more digestible protein out of that little tiny pallet area, that 1 square meter, than a hectare of soybean fields, right? So a hectare is 10,000 square meters. So it's 10,000 times, of what it would take for a field of soybean in just this tiny little, 1 square meter.
That's
So
amazing.
it's really remarkable.
It is really remarkable. And I know that there has been a movement really because of taking land that could be used to grow human food and growing soybean and growing corn to feed animals. There's a movement, I know here, at least in the United States, to return that land more to grassland and grass finish the food, the animals, rather than feeding them food that was grown on land that could be for humans, or food that could be for humans. And so this really is so much more economical and sustainable. I mean, you're not using 10,000 times less of
Yeah,
the,
and you think of the water resources, like the New York
yeah,
Times has done a great job recently of covering the aquifer draw that this type of agriculture has,
yeah,
like it's not something we can keep up forever, for sure, right? Like it's just not something that is very durable as far as a system of using our resources around us.
yeah.
And this provides this option, and it's not this crazy wild option. It's actually a much more, in my mind, a much more kind of deeply logical system, because just we have to be humble and look around and say this is the system that evolved, right?
Yes.
The what we're doing is taking the raw material, the carbon, the energy in our biological system, and using decomposer insects to convert it into new forms of that energy and mass. And that is what occurs in nature, right? So if we talk about like sustainability, the reason that grasslands and forests and freshwater systems persist for millions of years is because those actors, those biological decomposers, are present within those systems, recycling those nutrients in incredibly sophisticated ways that evolved over millions of years, and all of which we have done a great job of completely ignoring. We have very much disregarded everything that exists within that whole trophic level. It's like a whole trophic level that we kind of skip, and we just focus on other areas of biology to draw into our food system. And it's like, hey, once you realize it's there, you kind of can't unsee it, because
Well,
there's a
Martine,
lot
I
going
think you
on.
make a great point, and I don't know whether it's ignored. I think it's more like we've just stomped all over what has originally evolved as far as the biological processes, which you as a scientist can really speak to in a really intelligent way. And I appreciate that. Now that we've talked about some of the benefits, I mean, here on the front end, let's jump in. And you did a little bit about how we accomplish this? Because really you are starting to ask, well, how should things be happening? Here's what we're doing, but how did they evolve to happen? Like, what's the natural order of things, and how should they be happening? And how can we work in symphony with that rather than kind of the stomping all over it and creating our own way of,
Yeah.
here we see a solution. And I think just because we should doesn't, I mean, we can doesn't mean we should, is how I think about it. And we can do all the things we're doing, but should we be doing what we're doing? And you have some alternative answers to those questions.
Yeah, it's such an interesting question, right? Because I think that, and I guess to preface, of course, in biology and especially like ecology, like the study of ecosystems, everything is context dependent, right? So for any given geography and any kind of given situation, there is kind of many, many different ways of achieving the same outcome, right? So like in our particular case, we're using one particular species of insect that's good at a certain set of outcomes. But I think it's always good to highlight that I think that this is really just the beginning, right? We're using like so the insect that we use is the black soldier fly, Hermetia lucens. So the black soldier fly is the soldier fly genus Stratiomyida has 2,700 species.
Wow.
Only one of them is really been looked at seriously. Um, but if you look more broadly, right, you're talking about so Diptera, the group, the larger group of flies. There's 160,000 species there.
Oh my gosh.
Um, yeah, so
Talk about,
160,000.
we're not even like a pinhead of touching the surf.
Yeah, so it's about 25 times more than all mammal species.
Okay.
Just flies. Just flies.
Well, and
Um,
as a human, they've only been bothersome to me. So I was so excited to learn that they're not all bothersome. Some of them are
yeah.
really, really useful and innovative.
The vast majority are, yeah. So the bothersome ones are just a tiny, tiny, minuscule fraction, just a couple species really out of those thousands, right? And the majority of them, or yeah, I don't know the majority, but a really significant number of these Diptera are decomposers, and this is just one group, right? So. The beetle people will kind of get at me for not mentioning the beetle decomposers, but there's kind of infinite in practical terms, species of insects that are really good at decomposing things, right? So you think of all this incredible innovation within this natural system because, as far as the biological capacity of these organisms, they're remarkable, right? You name some form of organic matter, and you will find a specialist. You talk waste streams like manures, right? There are species that evolved for just one single animal. Like each mammal will have some associated, insect that is just specialized in their type of manure, right? And there's insects that are good at eating the manures of other insects, and the levels and levels and levels of biological complexity. And then it starts to scale out because each of those decomposers is associated with a whole wide array of microorganisms, and there's all sorts of really interesting interactions between and among them and competition and things like that. And again, just completely like very, very understudied by human systems, human biology, technology, entrepreneurship. It's just not something that we look at, right? And I think
Right.
it's also good to acknowledge that you and so many other people have encountered flies and found them bothersome. It's one of the reasons, right, that we are in the situation that we're in now. Like Western culture largely looks down upon insects, and because of that, we have disregarded the opportunities that they present to solve wicked problems. And for me, as a like massive insect fan, since I was 5 or 6, this just represents a really big opportunity where, like, actually, if you get really into the space, you realize there's low hanging fruit here, right? So other areas like kind of like material science, or there's so many areas that there's really good work to be done, but you're filling big boots. Like there's lots of other people have come along and tried to turn this into businesses and tried to tried and failed and all kinds of cool science. And where we specifically fall within insect agriculture, it's just there's very, very little. Right. So on the one hand, it's very exciting. On the other hand, it's like there's an enormous amount to be done because most of the science we know about these creatures is about how to kill them, right? So where does that
Yes.
leave us, right? So we have
Right.
this incredible diversity of insects. We have all this incredible biological complexity, and we realize that there's this trophic level of how to use biological resources. And now we have to just figure out how to make all this work and bring this incredible biological capacity to bear upon human systems in order to improve our food supply chains, our food systems, right?
Yeah, exactly. How do you harness this? So what you're doing specifically at Nutrition Technologies is with the black soldier fly. I mean, there is a lot of other investigative work that can be done, but what are you doing with the black soldier fly? Because you've done a lot of great things.
Yeah, so one thing, so kind of, everyone takes a little bit of a different approach. And one thing that we have done that's a little bit different from what others have done is to look very deeply at the insect in the context of its role within an ecological system, so what we call like decomposition ecology, and try to not reduce it down just to the species and its needs, right? And the reason for that is we think that the cool and innovative thing really about black soldier flies is not that they're insects, right? People get a little hung up on that fact. It's like you can have insects that are basically like mini cows that have like a pretty big environmental impact, right? You have like really slow growing and efficient insects too, as far as like inputs to outputs or these type of biological systems. They exist as well, right? But not the black soldier fly and not a lot of decomposers because the fact is that that they're decomposers, or I guess that the more technical term would be detritivores, so these animals that eat detritus and eat organic matter. That is what's innovative about that's what creates this kind of 10,000 times space efficiency and this incredible opportunity. So once you have that perspective, you start to realize, well, so what is it about them that that is different, right? And our approach has been to look really at their interaction with bacteria and other microorganisms, because black soldier flies, so kind of if you look at how biological things kind of break down and decay in a biological system,
Right.
there's kind of a succession. So there's sort of an order in which different organisms appear, right? And black soldier flies come a little late to the party. So which means like, so if you have like a fresh vegetable or something, you have like a carrot that's like for us perfect, right? Crispy and fresh.
Mhm.
They are just not interested, right? But if you have like a carrot or something, a vegetable that is just slimy and stinky and kind of disgusting, something we would never eat.
Right.
Perfect, right? That's their
Oh,
absolute favorite food, right? So what that means is that they, for one thing, we're not entirely sure when we feed them an organic waste system, we don't know how much they're actually eating what we give them. A lot of things, like if you look at Drosophila, like the famous fruit flies in biological science, they're famous for eating fruit, but they don't actually eat that much fruit. They're actually, a lot of times, they're subsisting on the yeast that grows in decomposing fruit, right?
oh, so
And
byproduct of the decomposition is what they're eating.
exactly, yeah,
Oh,
because it's a more
I
like
actually
sometimes it
understood that. You're doing a good job, Martine.
it's it kind of makes sense, like if you think about it, because these are generalists, right? So they're not specializing in any one particular thing. They're moving to a lot of different organic waste. They're just taking advantage of whatever's there. It could be a dead animal, it could be manure, it could be a plant, right? So they're like, if you're looking for a reliable food source among all those, they have very little in common, except that potentially some of the same microorganisms might be breaking all those down. right? So if you form some good associations within that space, or maybe you show up to the party with your own microorganisms that you kind of get along with, that you maybe have a good symbiotic relationship with, then you start to say, oh, okay, you could see how this organism could take advantage of a really wide range of organic waste, but actually kind of have a more consistent, stable supply of food for itself. So the science is really out on kind of how much that is true and to what extent they're eating the the kind of microbial biomass versus the biomass directly that you give them. And again, it's probably context dependent. But basically, in our experience, growing insects at large scale, we think that most of the parameters that matter, most of the parameters that make a big impact in our system, can be modified, controlled, and optimized through changing the microbial community that these insects grow in to a much bigger extent than we ever imagined when we kind of went down this path. So the outcome is, so we have, so all of our feedstock is fermented before our insects consume it, and we ferment them in these big industrial silos using inoculants that we isolated from the black soldier fly midgut. So it's part of their microbiome is used to ferment all the hundreds and hundreds of metric tons of organic waste that goes through our facility. And then we can use other inoculants and other kind of microbial control systems at different stages to optimize or to create other products. And yeah, so we've ended up with we have more than 6 microbiologists at our company, and they're almost starting to outnumber the entomologists. That's the degree to which it's that important to the outcomes. But it's a bigger lesson about, if you're looking at this space at this kind of trophic level, you cannot reduce it down to a single species because these are, we call them high bioburden environments, like a decomposing thing, like a decomposing animal or manure plant. They are incredibly rich with biological life, right? Just, unbelievable quantities of bacteria, archaea, virus, phages that are killing bacteria, and then wave after wave after wave of detritivore arthropods that are breaking these down. And then you've got the bacteria and the fungi kind of competing, collaborating. There's all kinds of cool stuff. There's bearing beetles that'll show up to organisms, and they have their own symbiotic bacteria that they'll smear over the like a dead mouse, and that bacteria will produce a volatile organic compound that hides it from other decomposers. Again, this stuff just it didn't just appear. Right, all this decomposer stuff, it really evolved over hundreds and hundreds of millions of years. And evolution didn't get it right the first time. There was a lot of trial and error. There's really cool kind of stuff that happened with right rot fungi and how that influences global carbon cycles. There were events within decomposition, the evolution of decomposition that caused global climate change. Right? It's a big deal, the system that we have, right? It's really, really a big deal. So there's so much to do within this space. And for us as as a relatively young and small company, we're just trying desperately to keep up with the opportunities that emerge from looking and teasing apart some of these relationships for just one of these thousands of species.
I know. I for one I had no idea. I mean, there's this whole, it's almost like a whole separate ecosystem happening at this decomposer level. Once I think something is finished, after I've thrown something in the trash or put it in the compost pile or whatever, there's this entire other process that takes over and all these different actors that come into play. And there's opportunities there, is your point, for us to understand better how to best utilize some of the processes that are already in place, and how can we capitalize on them, and what can we learn from them, how can we duplicate them to hopefully work through some of the challenges that we're having with our own systems and impact them.
Yeah, and it's really kind of like a frame of view. So it was William Bateson, I think, that said, we think of animals and plants as matter, but they're really systems through which matter is continuously passing, right? So it's kind of useful to think of, again, you have everything that surrounds us, and then you have it moving through these organisms, right? And then the question of like, so all of a sudden you start to say, okay, a food supply chain, we have to fix these issues around like, waste and resources and finite resources that we seem to be really good at using up very quickly. And, how are we going to fix this? And ultimately, it's like, okay, we're currently moving matter through biological systems, right? We're investing, fertilizer and sun energy and space into crops and feeding those crops to animals and, producing a huge amount of greenhouse gas and then consuming the food and then disposing of a lot of that food in inappropriate ways. And how would we change that, right? So you just kind of
Yeah.
go back to the drawing board and say, okay, what are the other ways that matter can move through biological systems? And there's a lot of more logical ways of doing it.
Yeah. There's a lot of answers there.
Yeah,
Wow.
a lot of
Well,
answers.
we are not going to solve all those problems here on this one interview, but I think you have done an excellent job of informing our listeners and our viewers on YouTube of just some of the possibilities and what you as one company and what you humbly stated was, I mean, you've grown to scale, but you're still just one piece of the puzzle. And there's so much more exploration to happen out there. Is there anything else you'd like to leave with our audience before we go, Martine?
Yeah. Oh, so one thing maybe I'll just mention, one
Sure.
kind of piece of the puzzle that is quite cool is just around, we talked a bit about the protein as one of the outputs from the system. But one cool thing that we spend a lot of time thinking about is the what we call frass. So it's kind of
Yes.
the black soldier fly manure. And it's a really, really fascinating material. So black soldier fly frass is very strongly, from what our team has found, it's very strongly, it has plant pathogen inhibitory properties, which other biological composts will also have. But to a really remarkable degree, these products can inhibit and prevent plant pathogens, but it's also associated with a whole range of interesting outcomes in agriculture when you introduce them to plants. And one cool part of that is just, right, that plants evolved to get a lot of their nutrients from frass, right? So you go into like a forest and you look in the leaf litter, you see all these little round stuff, right? It's all frass, right? You've got all the
Oh,
little invertebrates in the forest floor kind of breaking down leaf matter into frass, and usually then it'll go through some bacterial fungal pathway and reach the tree again. So these plants that we grow in agriculture, they evolved to get a lot of their nutrients from frass, and it's missing, not new, it's just missing from agricultural contexts. And now we find when we reintroduce frass to plant nurseries or agricultural fields, we see a lot of really interesting outcomes. So teams around the world have seen things like increases in floral nectaries and resistance to pests and disease. So
oh.
that's quite a cool process, and also like it's an alternative to composting in a really interesting way as well. So it provides like a biological pathway to take again like kind of all the materials that you could use as inputs for composting, you can use for black soldier flies, and you produce again like this incredible product that can be used as an organic fertilizer plus all the animal feed, right? So it's just another perspective on how this stuff can work. And we've launched a couple products in the space, and it's given us a nice opportunity to interact with farmers and understand soil health concerns in places like Malaysia. So
Hmm.
that's been a really interesting journey, and we're excited to kind of take that further and do a lot. There's a ton more research that needs to be done.
Well, that is really interesting. So the frass from the black soldier fly, that's like an output from their consumption process and how they're working as decomposers. And this frass is a result of that.
Yeah, so it's one biological process, right,
Oh,
with two products. And the nice thing about that is they're very synergistically, like you can optimize for both of them at the same time. But the cool thing again is like if you look at the microbiology of what's going on during insect rearing, it seems to be like we theorize, and again, this is a little bit like we don't have that much research on this, but what we think is happening, again, like we described all those complex interactions between decomposers where sometimes they collaborate and sometimes they're competing with each other. Black soldier flies in particular, given kind of the stage at which they arrive at places of decomposition, they seem like they compete a little bit with filamentous fungi. As we notice these patterns where, if fungi takes over an organic material, black soldier flies will never really thrive there. But if black soldier flies thrive, then just fungal mats and things like that, they're not absent, but they're a little less likely to occur. So what we think is happening is we can just kind of, in the context of helping address some of these plant pathogen problems, we're just taking advantage of this kind of evolutionary arms race that occurs within decomposers, which is like decomposers. If you're looking for biological evolutionary arms race that creates like novel molecules, look in decomposers, right? Like that's what gave us antibiotics, right? That's where it comes from, the
Wow.
penicillin mold and a bacteria. So it's a great place to look. And so if we're looking for, again, we're trying to, we've done trials with our products on tropical race 4 fusarium, right? Huge issue in banana, right? I'm from Ecuador in South America, and these kind of pathogen is kind of one of the things my country fears the most, right? That could cripple the economy, and they're horrific, right? There's no fungicide. They're kind of quickly moving from country to country, and we need these kind of biological systems with multiple modes of action. So hopefully these kind of solutions can come around in the right time where we can start to also address those very pressing problems within agriculture as well.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. Martine, there is still so much work to do. The opportunities are out there. I think that's the exciting part about what I've heard this morning. And on this interview, I think, so much has already been done, and you've been able to uncover and be helpful and impactful as we started out the interview with. But then, gosh, there's also so much else as you learn more, you're realizing how much more there is. And I really appreciate you bringing your scientific approach to all of this to our listeners, because I don't think they've heard it that way before. And now they've got the facts of the case. And I love the, the whole arms race at a, environmental level, or just at for the decomposers. It's pretty fun to think about it in those kind of terms. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Great.
And if you enjoyed this interview with Martine and want to hear more like it, please subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss an episode. And please engage with us. We'd love to know what questions you have, what you thought, and give some feedback. Until next week, I'm Pam Linemiller.
Thanks for listening to Future Foodcast. Future Foodcast is powered by Farm to Plate, the leading food blockchain platform. Subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date with the very latest innovations in the food industry.